Are you thinking about moving to Philly but can't decide if you should stay in New York City instead? The two cities obviously are very close by to each other, but financially, culturally, and in lifestyle, there are definitely a lot of differences. And so today I'm going to break down some different things about cost, the vibes, housing, taxes, and more so that you can start to compare which city makes more sense for you. I've helped dozens of people to relocate from New York to Philadelphia. Some rent, some buy, some invest, and I've seen surprises. I've seen wins, and I've seen things that people regret. My name is Mark Gabriel. I live here in Philly. I sell here, I invest here, and my goal is to give you a breakdown of what life really looks like here. I've never lived in New York, so I'm not going to be able to give you a firsthand experience of living in New York, but I can definitely tell you some of the differences of the two cities by, just my background of the people that I've helped who have moved from New York to Philadelphia. So the number one thing that people tell me when they're moving from New York City to Philadelphia is that the main driver is simply financial. They are looking at how far their dollar is going to stretch, and they know that in Philly, it's generally going to stretch a lot farther. So if you're looking at the difference in just simply housing, there's a study that was done between just Manhattan housing and Philadelphia, and the housing in Manhattan was generally over 300% more expensive than in Philadelphia. And generally in all of New York City, it's estimated that it's about 52% higher than Philadelphia, which is pretty astronomical. So when people look at the difference in the lifestyle that they can have, they look at what their money can buy in New York City. Some people say that their money can't even really buy them anything in the areas of New York City that they would want to be in. Or if it could, it's just not going to stretch as far, and they're going to have to compromise certain conveniences in their housing situation that they could come to Philadelphia and, be in a situation that is much more comfortable for the lifestyle they want to live. But also because Philadelphia is still a relatively large city, they still get the same feel of being in a large metropolitan area and a lot of the same conveniences that they would have as living in New York City. The difference in living costs doesn't really just stop at housing, although housing is one of the bigger drivers, but even just generally like your everyday living costs are definitely higher in New York City. Generally, like if you're looking at groceries, restaurants, generally 20 to 30% higher than what you find in comparable, things in Philadelphia. So the main driver that I'm seeing is that people in New York City feel like their money isn't stretching far enough. And essentially, they want a similar type of living situation, but they want to be able to afford more space, more bedrooms, more convenient locations in comparable areas that feel kind of similar to New York City. Now, one surprise that a lot of people don't take into account when they're moving to Philadelphia is the city wage tax. This is something that you do want to be aware of coming from New York. Philadelphia does have a pretty high city wage tax, and it's 3.74% for residents, and it's 3.43% for non-residents who are operating their businesses or working in the city of Philadelphia. So this is something to factor in. There is going to be a little bit of a compromise. You are going to a cheaper living situation. You are going to be able to afford more in your daily spending, but you are going to have a city wage tax that is on your income that could be something to factor in. So let's talk a little bit about the lifestyle differences. I think that a lot of the people that I see come from New York are looking for a little bit of a slower pace city. They don't want the same hustle and bustle that you get in New York City. I know from visiting New York and friends in New York, it is a very like driven, go, 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 always on type of environment. I'm sure it's not like that in every single neighborhood, but if you're in like Manhattan and, the areas where people are going out, it is very hustle and bustle. So I think the pace and energy of New York City is really, it's for some people, like they love it, they thrive on it. And then other people want something that's a little bit slower pace. And I think Philly is a good in between because it's not like you're, by any means moving to the suburbs or, moving out of a city environment. You're still very much in a city environment, but Philly is a city that has a little bit more breathing room in terms of like the center city downtown area. There is some hustle and bustle, and there is a lot of life and activity going on, but it's not like overly crowded. It's not mobbed with people, and there's definitely a little bit more room to breathe. And then you do have a lot of pretty quiet residential neighborhoods that are a little bit, slower pace, good community vibes, and there are those outskirt neighborhoods outside of Center City as well. If you go up to Fishtown, that kind of have their own little nightlife and their own commercial strips that people can take advantage of, but like they feel like their own community, and it's kind of like separate from the center city area. So I think depending on the lifestyle you want to live, it's obviously very important. I think there's probably no comparison to New York and the, amount of energy and people there. So if you're really looking for that, you might want to stick to that. But if you're looking for something that's a little bit quieter and a little bit slower paced, but still is a city that's very active and, full of bars, restaurants, entertainment, Philadelphia is a great place to definitely look. And going off of, the different vibes of the two cities, I think one thing that people in New York really will hang their hat on is that like there's an unmatched variety of food options. You obviously have tons of top restaurants and great bars, and it's one of the best nightlife cities in America. So I think that is something that like Philly has a great ecosystem of restaurants and bars and entertainment as well. And it might not compare to the scale of New York City, but it definitely has its own really deep connection with the city. And I think that we are finally getting recognized on a more national stage. We have a lot of restaurants in the city that have been recognized nationally. A lot of chefs that have won James Beard's awards, and we have the Michelin Guide that is now starting to, I know, rank and award some of our restaurants here. And I would put Philly up with pretty much any city in America as far as the food here. Personally, I've visited a lot of different cities in the United States, and I always say I would love to live in this city, but I don't think I could leave Philly because I would miss the food so much. Because honestly, Philly has so many great restaurants. It does have a ton of variety. You can get pretty much food from any different, culture, ethnicity in the city, and it's excellent. So I would say if you're scared of leaving New York because you think you're not going to have the same food options, you probably will have less options, but there are excellent options in Philadelphia. So one of the biggest hits on living in Philly versus New York, I would say, is probably the public transportation. New York, I think, is quite literally unmatched as far as like being able to use public transportation to get around. It is a sprawling network of, trains and subways and bus systems that really make it convenient to get around New York City. Philadelphia, we have SEPTA. We've had issues with it. And, there are definitely plenty of bus routes and trolleys that you can use. But as far as the subway, it really is a couple main lines. You have the Broad Street line and you have the Market Frankford line. So if you're living in an area that is not super close to the subway lines, it becomes a little bit inconvenient to use the subway. We do have regional rail lines that definitely can take you in and out of the city. So I don't want to say that there's a complete lack of public transportation in Philly, but I think if you're going to stack up New York City versus Philadelphia, I would say that New York is much more robust and probably much more convenient. Again, I can't speak firsthand about living in New York, but even from the times that I visited New York, it's been very easy for us to get around using the public transportation. And I know Philly can be a little bit more difficult. Now, on the flip side of that, Philadelphia has been awarded the #1 most walkable city in America a few years in a row now. So although it can be a little bit tougher to use public transportation, Philadelphia is definitely a city that you can get around biking and walking pretty easily. all the neighborhoods are somewhat interconnected, and it's really not hard to get around. It's also a much smaller city, so even from where I live, pretty far south in South Philadelphia, I can walk up into Center City in the span of probably 25 to 30 minutes if I really wanted to. And I think, when you're looking at that, it may be more convenient to live in Philly depending on where you're working in Philly versus where you live, because it may be more affordable to own a place or rent a place close enough to where you work that you could just walk there and not even have to really worry about public transportation. So I think the walkability of Philadelphia and the interconnectedness of all the different neighborhoods is one of the things that I like the most. And I think that given New York is just so humongous and sprawling, it is so much more likely that you need to rely on public transportation, whereas Philly, you might be able to just walk or bike to where you're going and you'll be completely fine. So let's talk a little bit about the economies and the job opportunities. So obviously, New York is one of the leading cities as far as the amount of corporations that are operating out there. You have finance, you have media, you have tech, you have fashion. It's it compares to some of the world-class cities. So I think there's obviously going to be a much larger job market in New York City, and especially if you're looking for global leadership in these large corporate roles, you're going to find those in New York City. The great thing is, ever since COVID, a lot of those roles have become more accessible to get remotely. And so that's one of the things I'm seeing people from New York realize, and it's one of the drivers for the influx of New Yorkers who are coming to Philly, is that they're looking at the fact that even if they may have to be in the office once or, twice a week, they could actually live in Philly, do the job mostly remotely, pop into New York when they need to. You can take the Acela and be in New York within, an hour and a half, 2 hours. And I know people who do that commute on a weekly basis, and it works for them because they feel like their dollar is going so much farther here. So they're getting the New York salary, but then they're paying the Philly cost of living, and they can afford to just take that train in and out, and they are willing to, sacrifice a little bit more time to do that in order to live that lifestyle. So New York, obviously, a bigger job market and more world-class organizations that are large corporate companies that are going to be operating out of there. But don't sleep on the fact that you may be able to live in Philly and still work in New York City. Now, Philly is really strong in healthcare, education, biotech. There's a lot of nonprofits here as well. We have Comcast. So there's a great job market here as well. We do have a growing community of startups and life sciences. So they have the Pennovation Works near Grays Ferry, and they're expanding even in the Bellwether district. There's going to be a whole life sciences aspect to that over near that Grays Ferry in South Philadelphia, Southwest Philadelphia area. So it's a growing economy. It's a growing job market, but I would say a lot of the people that I see working in Philadelphia, it is a ton of healthcare. There's a lot of people working at universities. We have world-class universities here in Philadelphia. So those are really the driving markets in the Philadelphia area. But again, don't sleep on the fact that remote jobs are here. And while a lot of companies are trying to bring people back in the office, I think a lot of companies have also committed to the fact that remote work is here to stay. And that can give you an opportunity to really cut your living costs, but still work in one of these larger corporations from afar. So that's my spiel on some of the things that I think compare between the two cities, some of the pros of each, some of the cons of each. So I guess to end this video, I'll just say, when do I think you should move to Philly versus when might you want to just stay in New York City? So I think where Philly really wins is you have obviously more affordability. You have a little bit more breathing room and space. I do think it might be a little bit easier to get a sense of community in Philadelphia because the neighborhoods are, in certain neighborhoods, pretty tight knit and they're very walkable. And so you're not going across the city, and it gives you a little bit more of an opportunity to meet your neighbors and things like that. And then also, if you're working in fields where like Philly has a strong job market, or if you are working in a job in New York City that you have the opportunity to be remote, I would say that is an excellent opportunity to move to a new city, explore it, cut your living costs significantly. And I do think that Philly stacks up pretty well as far as what you get in comparison to the cost, as far as like still giving you a great city feel with a lot of options, a lot of nightlife, a lot of entertainment, a lot of great restaurants, bars, etc. I think you may want to stay in New York City if you really crave the hustle and bustle, nonstop, movement of the city. I think that there's probably an unmatched level of access to different restaurants and bars and entertainment in New York City that just no city is going to really stack up to. So if you're super attached to that, obviously it's something that you're going to want to factor in. And I don't think you're going to get quite the same feeling in Philadelphia. Secondly, obviously, if your job requires you to be in New York City like really, really often, I do feel like that commute might get tiring at some point. Because obviously you're going to have to do that really, really often. If it's once or twice a week, it might be more manageable for you. But if you're doing that more often than that, it might become an issue. And then third, simply if you just have a humongous budget and you can pay a premium to live in New York City, in the area you want to live, and it's not really a factor of finances, that might be a reason to just stay in New York City. Personally, I have spoken to a lot of people who they stay in New York City pretty much their entire career. And then when they're looking to cut down their cost of living and retire, at that point, they will make a little bit of a transition and look to live in Philadelphia that's a little bit quieter, a little bit slower pace, and a little bit more affordable. So it kind of depends on where you are in your career. If you're crushing it right now and you're printing money and you can afford to live in New York City and you just love it, then I would say there's no reason to move. So those are really the notes that I have on the two cities. And if you enjoyed this video, or if you're considering still moving to Philadelphia after this video, please feel free to reach out to me and hit the like and subscribe button if you found this video helpful. I'll see you next time.